They desperately needed the crown, but the crown no longer needed them. When Harry and Meghan flew out of Melbourne at the end of their 2026 Australian tour, the silence from the palace was not simply an absence of noise. It was a verdict. No statement, no acknowledgement, no reaction whatsoever. William had made sure of that, because after everything that had unfolded over those weeks, the monetized hospital visits, the unsold wellness tickets, the diplomatic interference with the King's upcoming state visit, the Prince of Wales had arrived at a conclusion that could not be walked back. The Sussex experiment was over, and the instrument he chose to end it was not confrontation. It was something far more devastating. Absolute silence. But to understand how the monarchy reached this point, you need to see what William saw. And what he saw from behind the closed doors of Adelaide House was enough to make him question whether his brother had any judgment left at all. The visit that crossed every line. The breaking point arrived on April 14, 2026, inside the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. Meghan appeared at the ward performing what looked like the traditional duties of a working royal, kneeling beside children battling terminal illness, holding their hands, smiling for the cameras. The optics were polished. The intention behind them was something else entirely. Within hours of that visit, the designer gown she had worn was cataloged by her AI-driven fashion venture and listed for sale online. Direct purchase links were pushed through her lifestyle brand's digital channels. The dress she had worn while comforting dying children became a shoppable item before the hospital had even released its own statement about her visit. William reportedly described this as the ultimate commodification of empathy, using sick children as props for a commercial catalog. His private assessment cut deeper than any public statement could have. He called it surface-level activity devoid of any independent thought or true altruistic intent. In his eyes, the Sussexes were no longer serving causes. They were using causes to serve their shopping carts. That single moment crystallized something that had been building inside the palace for years. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was an institutional threat that required an institutional response. Australia turned its back. The 2026 tour was supposed to echo the magic of 2018, when Meghan and Harry had been greeted across Australia with genuine warmth and enormous crowds. 8 years later, the atmosphere was unrecognizable. The streets that had once been packed with cheering supporters felt cold, sparse, and openly hostile. Over 45,000 Australian citizens signed a petition demanding that not a single cent of taxpayer money be allocated toward the couple's security or logistics. This was not a fringe protest. It was a mainstream cultural rejection from a country celebrated for its sharp instinct for authenticity and its refusal to tolerate arrogance. When Meghan put on an apron at a local center to cook for the homeless, the gesture was not received as service. It was seen as a photogenic distraction from the $3,000 wellness retreat tickets being sold a few miles away. When she centered her own experiences of digital trauma in spaces dedicated to survivors of systemic oppression, critics called it psychological colonization. She was not there to listen. She was there to be heard. The public had seen through the performance, and they were not interested in applauding. The retreat nobody wanted. The centerpiece of the Australian trip, the Her Best Life Wellness Retreat in Karachi, was marketed as an ultra-exclusive sanctuary for the global elite. Priced at $3,199 per ticket, it was intended to be Meghan's definitive statement as a global lifestyle titan. Instead, it became the clearest evidence yet that the Sussex brand had hit its ceiling. Despite initial claims from the couple's PR team that tickets sold out within minutes, the reality leaked quickly. Organizers were caught sending desperate follow-up emails to anyone who had ever expressed passing interest in the brand, offering last-minute bring-a-friend discounts that shattered every claim of exclusivity. The frantic marketing suggested a massive surplus of empty seats being managed through panic rather than demand. The credibility collapse deepened when the lead coordinator was found to be carrying a personal tax debt exceeding $500,000, with her previous management firm recently liquidated. Jackie O. Henderson, the Australian broadcasting powerhouse and co-founder of the brand, severed ties just days before launch in what was widely interpreted as a protective measure to distance herself from the wreckage. For a venture built on the promise of living your best life, the behind-the-scenes reality looked like a distressed inventory clearance rather than a prestigious gathering. Hollywood went silent. The commercial failure in Australia was not happening in isolation. Back in Montecito, the power circle that had once surrounded the Sussexes had effectively dissolved. Oprah Winfrey, the Obamas, the Clooneys, the titans who had once publicly championed the couple's truth had gone quiet. Sussex fatigue was no longer a tabloid theory. It was a professional reality across the entertainment industry. The signal that landed hardest came from Mariah Carey, a former guest on Meghan's podcast. In a major interview, Carey pointedly noted that the only member of the British royal family she had ever truly spent time with was Sarah Ferguson. The public erasure of her interaction with Meghan sent a clear message through the industry. The A-list was no longer willing to be drafted into the Sussexes' ongoing war with the monarchy. Netflix insiders signaled that the streaming giant was running out of patience with the repetitive grievance narrative that had defined the couple's output since 2020. Several of Meghan's projects had already been canceled or indefinitely delayed. Without a radical shift toward genuine high-quality content, the $100 million contract was heading toward expiration. That looming deadline was fueling the desperate commercial energy of the Australian tour, a final attempt to squeeze value from their titles before the clock ran out. The protocol that ended everything. William's response was not emotional. It was architectural. He dismantled the remaining bridges between the Sussexes and the monarchy with the cold precision of someone who had been planning it for years. The most devastating measure was the witness protocol. Following Harry's public comments during a Movember event in Melbourne, where he described upgrading the parenting model for Archie and Lilibet in language the palace interpreted as a direct psychological attack on King Charles during his cancer treatment, William and the king formalized a standing rule. No member of the royal family would meet with Harry alone. Ever. Every interaction, no matter how brief, would require a third-party witness or legal representative present. This was not a gesture of caution. It was the institutional acknowledgement that every private conversation with Harry was now treated as potential raw material for a future Netflix documentary or memoir sequel. The family hearth had been replaced by a legal minefield. Trust was no longer a currency that existed between these brothers. The financial firewall followed. William drove the position that if the Sussexes wished to operate as private celebrities, they would bear the full financial and security costs of private citizens. No half-in, half-out lifestyle subsidized by Commonwealth taxpayers. The petition from 45,000 Australians gave him exactly the public mandate he needed to make that policy permanent and visible. Deleted from history. The most striking act of erasure came during the centenary celebrations for the late Queen Elizabeth II. In a move directly overseen by William, Harry, and Meghan were systematically removed from the official commemorative program. Their names were absent from guest lists. Their images appeared in no tribute videos. No footage of them was included in the historical exhibitions marking Elizabeth's legacy. William anchored the narrative entirely on the direct line of continuity. What silence really sounds like. As the dust settled on the 2026 Australian tour, the contrast between the two paths had never been sharper. On one side stood a couple in Montecito, increasingly isolated from their peers, struggling to maintain a commercial empire built on grievance. On the other stood a monarchy refined by fire, leaner, more professional, anchored by William's discipline and Charles's resilience. William had made one observation that cut through everything else. The warmth the Sussexes received in 2018 was never personal. It was the public's deep respect for the crown as an institution being directed through two people who happened to be standing in its light. By returning as private citizens dressed in royal optics, Harry and Meghan had committed the fatal error of believing the love was for them rather than for the values they were supposed to represent. The crown did not need them. It never had. But they had needed the crown more, than they were ever willing to admit. And now that the connection had been severed, formally, financially, ceremonially, and emotionally, the silence from the palace was not cruelty. It was the sound of an institution that had already moved on. The vanishing act was complete, and the audience had already turned its attention back to the stage that still mattered. William did not stop at erasing the Sussexes. His plans for the monarchy go far deeper than anyone realizes. Click here to see what comes next. What do you think? Did William go too far, or was every move justified? Can Harry ever come back from this, or is the erasure permanent? Drop your honest take in the comments. And if this kept you watching, hit subscribe, because the next chapter of this royal story is already being written.